Kind of crazy to sit there and look at your calendar and see all of a sudden that the month of June has arrived. We've got some off-season Duke basketball topics that we want to dive into. A Mailbag Monday here for Locked On Blue Devils.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us today on this Monday, June 2nd, 2025. Locked On Blue Devils is your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on inside the life of Duke athletics. And on today's show, we're going to talk a lot about the Duke basketball team as it is a Mailbag Monday. And we got so many great questions sent in to you from you guys via the comment section on previous episodes, on our YouTube page, and also sending us emails, lockedonbluedevils@gmail.com, also on X at LO_Blue Devils. Kevin Connelly from Durham is here with me today to kind of dive into those mailbag questions that we received, and we'll do so much more on today's program. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review. Like this video if you watch our show each and every day on YouTube. Continue to show us your support here on the program. It means so much that we're able to do this for you each and every day. So I want to give a big time congrats to the Duke baseball team as well, as they have punched their ticket to the NCAA Super Regionals for this upcoming weekend after winning the Athens Regional this past weekend. We'll have more conversations about that in the days and weeks to come, but just did want to give Chris Pollard and company a big time congrats for their regional victory in the college baseball world. So without further ado, here he is. The aforementioned Kevin Connelly is here with us from Durham. And we were just talking, Kevin, people are pretty amazed that, we were waiting forever for this deadline to come on May 28th for draft decisions to be made. And now you look at the calendar, it's come and gone, and we find ourselves in the month of June.
Yeah, it's June already. Before you know it, the NBA draft will be here, and you'll have content about that up for your listeners, JJ, at the end of the month. So kind of hit a little bit of a lull here in June and July before things ramp back up and everyone gets back on campus in the middle to late August.
Yeah, this is where we like to see kind of the footage being out there of practice clips and 5-on-5 scrimmage. And yes, it's overreaction, but it's content for us to consume nonetheless when we're doing this in the daily space like we are. This past weekend, we saw K Academy come and go, and that's at least exciting because we saw several players on this upcoming year's team, including some of the freshmen that were already there. So we got to see them kind of in action, coaching the 35 and up fantasy basketball participants who came to play at K Academy.
Yeah, no doubt. You're searching for that stuff this time of year. And I think when you're looking at Duke and you're trying to see them, I shouldn't say bounce back, but obviously the end of the season was disappointing, but try to recreate some of that magic that they had this past season into next season. You're craving it, and you want to see what this new freshman class is going to do because, as we had talked about last week, it's a very young roster.
All right, let's get into it. It's a Mailbag Monday here today. We got several questions that were sent to us again in the comments from our YouTube page, also emailed lockedonbluedevils@gmail.com, or you can send us a DM on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. Johnny writes in for the first one here. Does the state of college basketball, where teams are flipping rosters more frequently, maybe give Duke more of an edge since we're more accustomed to doing this with so many freshmen? That's the question that comes in from Johnny. And I would say certainly so. With what Duke's been able to do over the last decade plus, building rosters, it's becoming more of the norm that all of a sudden you want to turn over your roster as quickly as possible. Duke's been doing that forever.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that, JJ. I think maybe it's a very little bit of an edge, but certainly it doesn't help. I think the other thing that you should kind of realize that, it was Mike Krzyzewski doing this, and yes, Jon Scheyer was an assistant and then an associate on his staff. So it's still kind of new for Jon Scheyer to be flipping this and be the man in charge and be pulling the strings about everything. But the one thing I'll say is where maybe it doesn't give them as much of an advantage is when you get freshmen on campus, they don't know anything. Yes, they're talented. Yes, they can really play ball, but they don't know what it's like to be a college basketball player. So maybe that's where everyone's kind of on a level playing field because when you're getting guys in the transfer portal, they know what it's like and they've competed at a high level of college basketball. So certainly I do think it doesn't hurt having to do that and flip your roster every year, being so freshman heavy. And let's be honest, though, even though Jon Scheyer said Duke was going to move away from being a freshman heavy roster, they're right back to a freshman heavy roster again this season. So, and they weren't as impactful in the transfer portal, getting guys who are actually going to play this year. So I don't know how much of a factor that plays for this upcoming season.
Yeah, the experience piece is always just something that's so interesting in these debates. And Duke has been a school that has primarily thrived on the one and done model for quite some time. And now it's how quickly can you get your roster experienced. Duke's going to have so many guys returning from this past year squad, not using the transfer portal in terms of bringing in significant pieces thus far. We'll see if that changes at all. But good question there from Johnny. All right, let's move on here. I got one from Pepper. That's fun. Pepper sends us a message. What do you think of the ACC dropping 2 conference games? And is there a team beyond North Carolina that you'd like to see Duke play twice a year? We talked last week about the new schedule being in place, 18 conference games. This season, it's going to be Louisville that Duke plays twice. How would you answer this question, though? What do you think of the ACC dropping 2 conference games, Kev?
I'm not a fan of it. I've said this before in your show, JJ. I am not a fan of the ACC going from 18 to 20 to 18 league games. I understand why they're doing it. I don't know how much it necessarily impacts things because the idea behind it is for ACC teams to add 2 more big-time non-conference games to their schedule. But how does that help you if you don't win those non-conference games? I mean, sure, I know there's somehow you can improve your metrics even if you lose a close game to the number 1 team in the country. But in order to really improve the metrics, you have to win. So I don't like why they're doing it. I get why they're doing it. But there's still execution behind it that has to be followed through in order for really to work for teams to have better metrics and get into the NCAA tournament. Yes, there is a team beyond North Carolina that I'd like to see Duke play, but it's interesting, right? Because I don't think, and you could say it's Wake Forest, but I don't think there's a true rival for Duke naturally in the ACC outside of North Carolina. I mean, for a couple of years, it was for Syracuse when Mike Krzyzewski and Jim Boeheim, the 2 legends, were still coaching their programs, and Syracuse was consistently a top 10 team. It was Virginia there for a while, but similar, like Mike Krzyzewski's gone, Tony Bennett's gone, and Virginia is not great of a program. Wake Forest is certainly close and local, and you could say that there's some local rivalry there, but the 2 programs are never really on the same footing. There had been some really good matchups with Louisville and Notre Dame when Louisville had Rick Pitino as their head coach, when Notre Dame had Bonzie Colson, and they were advancing deep into the ACC and NCAA tournament. And that's not really the case for those programs, although Louisville is on the rise. My long-winded answer to all that is going to be, I'd like to see Duke play NC State now 2 times per year, right? You always get the feeling that Duke has to go to Raleigh and play NC State, and that building has been such a house of horrors recently for Duke. But now you look at NC State, and yes, I know that they're much more of a rival of North Carolina than Duke. But with Will Wade there, it seems like they already have a great NIL budget, and that's probably only going to climb with the success of the team. It feels like Will Wade is going to have NC State challenging at the top of the ACC, if not this year, very soon in the near future. And we expect Duke to remain at the top half of the ACC and competing for ACC regular season championships. So I'd like to see NC State appear more on the Duke schedule every season.
Yeah, you look at kind of the all-time rankings there for the Blue Devils. North Carolina, we've played the most games with the Tar Heels. And then second would be Wake Forest, third NC State, fourth Virginia, fifth, still surprisingly, is Maryland, although they're not in the conference each and every year for the Blue Devils. But those kind of traditional ACC schools is kind of where I think that people would want to see Duke make up those games and be able to play them multiple times throughout the course of the season because there is that competitive history there. I like that. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll take our first break here on the program. Again, thanks to Johnny and Pepper for our first questions here on Mailbag Monday today. Our conversation continues in just a moment. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Monarch Money is the absolute best oftentimes when you're looking for a way to track your expenses, Monarch Money has been where I have been going as of late. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch Money, I realized just how much I was spending on things like food delivery, and now I'm able to budget smarter and save a whole lot more. Instead of having to juggle multiple apps, you can use Monarch Money to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com to save 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Monarch Money is a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Okay, let's keep going forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. He's Kevin Connelly from Ball Durham, and I'm JJ Jackson. We've got a Mailbag Monday. We want to continue to answer your questions as we go throughout the offseason. We'll have more frequent Mailbag Monday episodes, so make sure you capitalize on that one. Got a question here from Rod, who writes in. Rod wants to know, how have you seen Jon Scheyer improve as a coach since getting the head job? Why don't you go first here, Kevin?
This is a really good question, right? Because there had been, I'm not going to say a lot, but I think a fair amount of criticism around Jon Scheyer the course of his first 3 seasons. And I think we've seen him get better, especially orchestrating an offense each season he's gone forward. And that's been big for him, because if you remember his first 2 seasons, it was a Duke team that really struggled to score the basketball, and that was obviously not the case this year. And I think that had to do with a lot of the talent that they had that could score the basketball. But I think that's the biggest area where you've really seen him get better as a head coach. And not to say that there aren't areas where he can continue to improve, but this is a Duke team that, for the most part, I would say 95% of the time, they are prepared to play. They don't look overwhelmed in a setting. They don't typically lose their composure in a game, and that's all a reflection of the head coach. And I to add to that, I think you saw that a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken, his first season when they got taken to the woodshed by Miami. They got taken to the woodshed by NC State. And those were games where they just didn't show up and they weren't prepared to play, and it showed on the court. And you haven't seen that as much the last 2 seasons. So I think he's getting much better developing his offense and relaying to his team what he wants them to do. But so far, so good, everything for Jon Scheyer. And obviously, I didn't mention in those successes him consistently bringing top-tier talent over the course of his first 3 seasons.
Yeah, I remember early on there was a non-conference game against Purdue that wasn't the best. And I can't recall if that's the Paulo year, now that I'm thinking about it.
No, that was Phil Knight Invitational.
Okay.
That was his
that
first
Scheyer
season
or was
out
that
in Oregon.
Okay, that was Scheyer then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then to your point, I'm just this past year there weren't beatdowns, right? And that's remarkable. I think we'd be naive to think that that's going to be a trend that remains constant. Sadly, Kevin, I do think there's a beatdown at some point, in our lives moving forward, watching Duke basketball. But for him to be so engaged and locked in with the changing landscape of the sport, and then X's and O's to be able to do that as well. On Coach K's staff, Jon Scheyer was really dialed in defensively. He gives a lot of credit to Jay Lucas being the defensive coordinator over the last few seasons, but Scheyer really had a hand in that as well. And then the offense continuing to improve game by game. I think you're spot on with that. I think that's definitely where we've seen him improve moving forward. So appreciate that question there. All right, let's move forward to our next one here on this mailbag. Tim's got a question for us. He's got, Duke has had very little transfer portal movement, despite that being very common in college basketball. Are you surprised? And how can Duke use that as a positive? I think simply put, you've got to be a little bit surprised that there are only 3 teams in Division I that didn't have a scholarship player enter the transfer portal, and Duke, once again, is one of them. That's remarkable considering how the season went. I think people would have thought maybe somebody like Caleb Foster is headed off to the transfer portal. I know that I had my weeks where I thought for sure he'd be gone. I thought there was a while where possibly somebody like Darren Harris was going to test the transfer portal waters and leave there elsewhere. In terms of Duke not being so active in bringing in transfers, we had the Cedric Coward sweepstakes that didn't go Duke's way with him ultimately staying in the draft. I guess I'm kind of surprised that there isn't an impact player necessarily coming into the transfer portal, given that that's kind of how it's been the last few seasons. What do you say, Kev, when you kind of look at the landscape of all of this and this question?
Yeah, so I'll take the back end of the question first. And how can Duke use not being active in the transfer portal as a positive? Well, I think, JJ, the way you first said it, with nobody transferring out, and they're one of a handful of schools that haven't had anybody leave or scholarship player leave to the transfer portal. I think that's obviously a positive. And the fact that they didn't bring anybody in, I think they're just going to preach roster continuity, of that they're keeping their core guys together aside from those who left for the NBA draft, and they're returning for another season. And the continuity as they add in a talented freshman class, that's how they're going to spin it as a positive. Yes, I am surprised of very little transfer portal movement in both directions. I did think a guy like a Darren Harris could jump into the transfer portal. Caleb Foster, although given his strong end to the season, I guess that became a little bit more unlikely. I'm more surprised that they didn't bring in a impact transfer guy like Jack Scott from Princeton, Ife Iwuchukwu from Rice. They're not going to play. So Duke is really running it with this returning core plus their freshmen. And there's a lot of time to get into this throughout the rest of the offseason, JJ. But and I've touched on this before, Duke's not going to be as good as last year. And that's not to say they're not going to win the national championship this upcoming year. That's in no way am I saying that.
Sure.
But last year's Duke team, in terms of the advanced metrics, and you look at Ken Pom and all this other stuff, I mean, they were a top 2, top 3 Ken Pom team of all time. It was them and Auburn really throughout the entire season in the Ken Pom rankings that were the 2 highest rated Ken Pom teams ever. So that's a impossible bar to be set to and to live up to. So Duke is not going to be as good as they were last season. And not to kind of say, if they added X, Y, and Z from the transfer portal, they could have been as good as they were for last season. But I think that's one thing that fans are really going to have sink in throughout the summer and into the early fall months, is Duke is not going to be as good as they were. But that's not to say this team can't go on and win 30 games and win an ACC tournament and win a national championship.
Well, let me add to your point. I think it's probably safe to say that college basketball isn't going to be as good this upcoming year as the one that just concluded. You mentioned Duke, you mentioned Auburn, the other Final Four teams in Florida and Houston. There's stretches where they are 4 of the top 10 greatest teams in the Ken Pom era when we're looking at efficiency, all in one season. I think it's overwhelming that the college basketball year, this upcoming one, is not going to be as good as what we just saw.
I'll agree with you to an extent. I mean, I haven't done a deep dive on every roster of guys coming back, but I do think at least a little bit of that could be, and the NIL standard of it all, and how many guys on not necessarily Duke, but Houston, Florida, Auburn would have tried to go to the NBA in prior seasons, last offseason, not returned, and then played college basketball and eventually have their team to a Final Four. So, I mean, if you're playing the odds here, yes, the teams in the Final Four are not going to be for the top 10 Ken Pom rated teams of all time.
That's all I'm doing. I'm just playing the odds, Kevin.
Yeah, but that's not to say there could be some really good teams that emerge throughout the country.
All right, let's go ahead and we'll take our next break here on the program. One more break left to go, and then when we return, we'll start to wrap up this Mailbag Monday here on Locked On Blue Devils. Thank you so much for making Locked On Blue Devils your first listen and your first watch here today. For your second listen, make sure that you go check out the Portal Show. Locked On's very own Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Also, go check out Locked On College Basketball. Andy Patton and Isaac Shade recently did their newest power rankings for college basketball, and they're starting to fade our Duke Blue Devils just a little bit. Go listen to their discussion and figure out why after you check out today's episode. You can find that wherever it is that you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Okay, we'll get set to move forward into our final segment here on today's show alongside Kevin Connelly. I'm JJ Jackson doing some Mailbag Monday thoughts here. We got two Tims that entered the chat on today's show with some good questions for us. So Tim number 2 writes in a question: who's having a good offseason in the ACC, and will anyone be able to challenge Duke at the top of the league? When you're looking geographically in the ACC, you don't have to travel very far to find one of those schools that's having a really good offseason, Kevin.
Yeah, I think you can make a valid case that the team that's having the best offseason in the ACC is NC State for all the reasons that I mentioned a few minutes ago. I mean, Will Wade has injected life into that program. And yes, I know it's kind of crazy to say that after they just went to a Final Four 2 years ago. But the Kevin Keatts era, if not for that miraculous postseason run, he would have been fired probably that offseason. So they obviously have to keep him. They don't have a great season this year. They bring in Will Wade. He's already landing top transfer portal players. You know he's going to hit big with high school seniors eventually. Brought a couple in this offseason. So do I think NC State could challenge at the top of the ACC this season? No, but I could see them finishing anywhere in the top 6 to 7 in the league. The one other team that probably is going to have their offseason not talked about as much just because of all the noise that Will Wade is making with the Wolfpack is Louisville. I mean, Pat Kelsey did a phenomenal job last season taking over a desolate program in Louisville. He gets them to the ACC championship. They make it. They're an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. And unfortunately for them, they lose in the round of 64 to Creighton. But look for Louisville to try to take that next step. And again, their record in the conference, very similar to Duke, might not be as strong this year or next year, however you want to phrase it, as it was this past season. Just because I think the conference as a whole is going to be a little bit better and there's going to be more competition. But I could see Louisville definitely challenging Duke for the top seed in the ACC tournament.
Yeah, I think those are the first two schools that come to mind for a lot of people when you're evaluating what it looks like. Louisville gets one of the biggest in-conference transfers with Isaac McNeely going from Virginia to Louisville. Ryan Odom comes in as the new head coach at Virginia, and I do kind of like some of the moves that UVA's been making. I think they'll be improved from where they were a year ago. Same with the school like Syracuse. I like the freshman class coming in. They had an underrated move within the league. I thought Nathan George was one of the better point guards that we've seen in the conference over the last few seasons at Georgia Tech. He's now going to be at Syracuse this upcoming season. So those would be some of the schools that I'm impressed with the offseason and having a good offseason. But in terms of challenging Duke at the top of the league, I think it's a Cardinals team that's going to be opposite Duke for the best going forward here. All right, our final question.
Just one thing on that, JJ. The other team that we haven't mentioned, and I don't think they're going to be able to challenge at the top of the league just because they're so young and have a rookie head coach, Miami. I think Miami has made good roster additions. I think they will be obviously much better. It's hard to get worse from what they were, but I think Miami will be better. In a couple of years, I think we could be having conversation. Is this the year for Miami to get back into the top 4 of the ACC?
Okay. All right. We've got one more to go here on one of our recent Locked On Blue Devils videos on YouTube. Jillian left us a comment for the program saying Duke has seemingly played anyone and everyone in non-conference play over the years. Is there a team or venue that Duke hasn't played that you'd like to see them play at? So what's on, if you're putting together the fun schedule and that sort of thing, first thing that comes to mind for me, Kevin, is something that I guess could be relatively realistic now that we've got this partnership with the ACC and the SEC. I really want to see Duke and Rupp Arena. I really want to see the Kentucky Wildcats inside Cameron Indoor. I hope that happens at some point, is one of the first that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, it feels like that could be a reality this season. I think Duke is scheduled to host the ACC SEC Challenge. So Kentucky's not on their schedule, so they could very easily be on the schedule this year, and you could see Kentucky in Cameron, which is good because when you look at this Duke schedule, they are lacking a big-time non-conference game inside Cameron Indoor Stadium. Yeah. That's obviously a very easy answer. Another easy answer to make is Kansas, a home-and-home series with Kansas. And remember, that was reportedly talked about last offseason, and the talks for the home and home fell through, and that's why they played out in T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. And I know there were some scheduling issues because they technically couldn't do a home and home in back-to-back years because Duke is playing Kansas in Madison Square Garden this year in the Champions Classic. So it would have been a game in one of their home venues. I think it was supposed to be scheduled for Cameron last year. Then they would have had a break this year, and then they would have played in Allen Fieldhouse the following year. So that's a team, obviously, you'd like to see a home and home against, and to have Duke play in a historic setting like Allen Fieldhouse.
I'm kind of looking through the all-time non-conference meetings with the Blue Devils and the rankings of who they've gone up against. A team you know very well, Kevin, St. John's. They've had several really fun classic games with Duke over the year. That'd be a fun one to see. They've met 23 times all-time against one another. And then right there also with 23 meetings, Duke and Temple. It does feel like it's been a while since we've seen a Duke and Temple matchup take place, and we've seen both those home and away against that Philly squad.
Yeah, I mean, those two teams, while certainly at least not present day, although St. John's was a top 5 team last year and is expected to be a top 10 team coming into this season, they haven't been great basketball-wise in the past couple of years. The same with Temple. But if you go back 20, 25, 30 years, I mean, they were big-time, respectable, tough, hard-nosed programs. You're thinking of maybe some other schools, and what if Duke were to play in Maryland? I think that's the other one that comes to the mind of a lot of people when you're talking about games from 20 and 30 years ago.
Now we've gone full circle. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's Duke and Maryland in the ACC, and they have not met since their final ACC meeting before Maryland left for the Big Ten. And now Buzz Williams is the head coach of Maryland. Kevin Willard leaving to go to Villanova this past offseason, and Buzz Williams coming from Texas A&M. So is there any way, and I know a lot of fans would love to see it, that those two teams could get on the court and not in a neutral site setting, playing in Cameron, playing in Maryland? Could that be coming down the road anytime soon? I know a lot of fans would like to see it.
I'd love to see it. Maryland, St. John's, Temple. Let's bring back some of those big-time meetings that we've seen between Duke and those schools over the years. I know that as we go to the offseason, Kevin, you're busy. You've got wall-to-wall recruiting stuff, schedule thoughts, everything over at Ball Durham, right?
Yeah, we do. Over at balldurham.com, we got you on top of everything in this Duke basketball offseason. So come read us every single day and follow us on social media.
We'll talk to you again soon, Kevin. See you, man.
Thanks, JJ.
All right, that's Kevin Connelly joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, and that's going to bring our show here to a close. We do appreciate your support. Thank you for the questions that you sent in for this Mailbag Monday. We'll have many more coming in the upcoming weeks. Any questions that you want answered, simply comment down below on this video, or go ahead and send us an email, lockedonbluedevils@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to answer those for you in future episodes. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.